If I told you that investing just $100 a month could potentially grow into over $300,000, most people would say that's impossible. Yet millions never discover why not because they can't afford $100, but because they don't understand one simple principle that quietly creates wealth over time. What if the biggest financial change in your life doesn't come from earning more, but from doing one extremely small thing consistently that almost nobody takes seriously in the beginning, like setting aside just $100 every single month, something that sounds almost too irrelevant to matter when rent, bills, loans, and daily expenses already feel like they consume everything you earn. Yet over time, this one small number starts behaving in a way most people never expect, because the truth is, in countries like the United States or across Europe, the average working person is not struggling because they don't make money, but because their money is already assigned before it even reaches their account. And to understand this clearly, imagine a very normal life, a young professional in a city like New York, London, or Berlin, earning what would be considered a decent middle-class salary, around $3,500 to $5,000 per month after tax. It feels stable on paper, it feels like progress, but the moment that salary arrives it doesn't stay free for long, because immediately there is rent or mortgage, often $1,200 to $2,000 depending on the city. Then there are utilities, internet, transport, phone bills. And suddenly another $300 to $500 disappears. Then comes the car payment if there is one, or public transport costs that quietly build up every month. And then there are student loans in many cases, sometimes $200, sometimes $500, sometimes even more. And before a person even realizes it, half the income is already gone and we haven't even touched food, lifestyle spending, or credit cards. And this is where the subtle financial pattern begins, because what remains after these fixed expenses is often treated not as money to build wealth, but as money to relieve pressure, to feel rewarded, to feel like life is not just about survival, so it gets spent on small comforts, dining out, subscriptions, shopping, travel plans, or simply filling emotional gaps that the working routine creates. And this is where the $100 idea becomes interesting. Because if you ask most people in this situation to save $100 every month, they don't actually say "I can't." They say there's nothing left. But the real issue is not the absence of money. It is the absence of structure that separates what is consumed and what is reserved for the future. And over time, this creates a hidden financial illusion where someone feels they are earning enough to improve their life, but their net position never actually changes. They stay in the same cycle year after year, slightly increasing income, slightly increasing lifestyle costs, and ending up in the same place emotionally and financially. And this is where psychology plays a much bigger role than math at first glance, because human beings are not naturally designed to prioritize a future version of themselves over a present version. The brain values immediate comfort more than distant benefit, so when there is a choice between saving $100 or reducing today's stress with a purchase, the decision is often emotionally biased without even being consciously noticed. And this is why financial systems in modern societies feel so difficult for middle-income earners, not because they are mismanaging money in a dramatic sense, but because the system constantly encourages immediate spending while long-term saving requires deliberate resistance against that default behavior. And when you zoom out and look at what happens if that $100 is not saved for years, the impact is not just the lost money, but the lost compounding effect, because $100 a month is $1,200 a year, which seems small in isolation, but over 10 years that is $12,000 of personal contribution. And if invested in a simple long-term index strategy with even modest average growth assumptions, it can quietly turn into something significantly larger, not because of risk-taking or speculation, but simply because time multiplies consistency. And this is where most people misunderstand wealth building. They think it starts with a big decision, but in reality, it starts with a small behavior that is protected from lifestyle expansion. And without that protection, income increases almost always get absorbed into better rent, better food, better devices, better comfort, and the financial position remains unchanged. So the real question is not whether $100 is enough to become rich, because it isn't, but whether ignoring $100 habits keeps someone financially static even when their income grows. And in the next part, we will break down what actually happens over a long time horizon when this small monthly decision is either repeated or ignored, and why two people earning the same salary can end up in completely different financial realities without either of them making any extreme choices. Continuing from that same scenario, imagine two people who start at the same point in life. Same salary, same city, same pressure, both earning around $4,000 after tax each month, both paying similar rent, similar bills, both living what looks like an identical middle-class lifestyle on the surface, but there is one small difference that doesn't show up in daily life decisions at first. One of them consistently sets aside $100 every month without negotiating with it, without linking it to mood, stress, or leftover money, while the other simply lets the month decide what is possible. And at the end of 1 year, the difference feels almost meaningless. It's just $1,200 versus $0 saved in a structured way, but nothing life-changing yet, and this is exactly why most people underestimate this behavior. Because early-stage financial discipline rarely feels rewarding. It feels invisible, but as time continues, the gap stops being linear and starts becoming psychological and mathematical at the same time. Because the person who saves $100 doesn't just accumulate money, they accumulate identity stability. They start to see themselves as someone who is not entirely dependent on their next paycheck. And that mindset subtly changes future decisions. While the other person often compensates for financial pressure by adjusting lifestyle upward whenever possible. Maybe a slightly more expensive apartment, a newer car, higher subscription spending, or more frequent spending on convenience. And none of these decisions feel wrong individually, but together they slowly prevent any accumulation of capital. And after 5 years, the saver has put aside $6,000 before any growth, which still feels modest. But now, if even a simple average return environment is assumed, the gap starts to widen in a way that is no longer just about discipline, but about compounding behavior. Because the money is no longer just being stored, it is participating in growth. While the non-saver is still effectively resetting to zero every month, and after 10 years the saver has contributed $12,000 of their own money. But the invested value could reasonably sit significantly higher depending on market conditions, while the other person has nothing structured to show for the same time period except possibly higher lifestyle costs that do not return value. And this is where the emotional misunderstanding of money becomes important, because most people assume financial progress feels like visible improvement in lifestyle, but real financial progress often feels like nothing is changing in daily comfort at all. It is quiet, repetitive, and almost boring, which is why it is so often abandoned. And psychologically, humans are wired to abandon boring systems in favor of immediate feedback, so even when someone starts saving, a salary increase often breaks the system first. Not because they become irresponsible, but because their lifestyle adjusts faster than their discipline. And this is known in behavioral economics as lifestyle inflation, where every raise feels like permission to upgrade life instead of securing future freedom. And over time, this creates a strange paradox where people with higher income can feel just as financially constrained as when they started, because their fixed costs expand in parallel with earnings, and nothing is left to build long-term stability. And the key insight here is not that $100 is powerful on its own, but that it acts as a structural anchor, a minimum boundary that prevents total absorption of income into present consumption. And once that structure exists, even if imperfect, it becomes easier to scale it later to $200, $300 or more without resistance. Because the identity has already shifted from I try to save what's left to I allocate before I spend. And that single mental shift is often the real separation between long-term financial stagnation and gradual capital building. Not dramatic investing decisions, not perfect market timing, but whether future money is treated as optional or intentional. And when viewed across decades rather than months, that distinction quietly decides who ends up financially flexible and who remains permanently dependent on monthly income even at higher salary levels. And the uncomfortable reality is that both people can feel equally busy, equally hardworking, and equally responsible in their daily lives, yet arrive at completely different financial outcomes simply because one system protected a small portion of income consistently, while the other allowed income to dissolve entirely into lifestyle adaptation without resistance. The goal isn't to become rich overnight, it's to make small financial decisions today that your future self will appreciate years from now. If you found this perspective helpful and want more clear, practical insights about building long-term wealth, consider subscribing to Jimmy Invest for more videos like this.